Good morning, everyone. I'm Ian Pouncey. I'm here with Graham, and we've got Marco ready to present. And yeah, it looks like everything's been going really well so far. Some great talks. It's good to hear Shadi talking about what's going on at W3 and all about getting started with accessibility. But now we have Marco, who is, I guess, going to continue the theme a little bit with some web accessibility basics. I'm sure a lot of you know Marco already. He's read his bio, Senior Accessibility Quality Assurance Engineer and Evangelist at Mozilla Corporation. His responsibilities include testing new accessibility features as well as provide guidance in implementing those features. Prior to his work at Mozilla, Marco worked at a big assistive technology vendor for blind and low vision product. He is a screen reader user and knows many aspects of the accessibility stack from user to assistive tech to browser. That's a bit of an understatement, I think. Marco is one of the go-to people, at least for me and many others, on how how to make things work really well with a screen reader. So hello, Marco.
Thanks, Ian. Hello, everybody.
So should we just get started in a second? Remember, if you want to ask any questions of Marco, we'll have hopefully 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the session for questions. Then please tweet with hashtag ID24, and Graham and I will take a look at those and ask them to Marco at the end. All right. So you don't need to hear more from us. So let's just let Marco do his thing. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody, wherever in the world you may be now, or when you're watching this after the fact. Also, enjoy. Thank you for the invitation to the Paciello Group. It's an honor to take part in this great event. So let's dive right in. The web accessibility basics. Oops, it skipped one. I'm sorry about that. I was going to say, what are they? What are the web accessibility basics? It's basically the guts of the web. The web is a document-based model, even when we are using fancy apps like Gmail, Google Docs, or whatever else we might be using on the web that looks like an application. At its core, it's still a document. And there have been many building blocks for the web that have been around for 20 years and whose rules didn't change much over those 20 years. It's like, there are basics that have been laid out and they've been improved upon, and some new stuff has been added, but at its core, all the stuff that I'm going to show you has been around for the most part for the last 15 to 20 years. And Google are having a theme this year at going back to the web. Mozilla has renewed its strength on the browser, on the Firefox, and Microsoft has come out with a new browser in Windows 10, which is more standards compliant than what's been there before, and that's always a good thing to happen. So let's dive right in. The first thing, labeling images. Images are an essential part of the web, like text is. So when there is something that cannot be shown as text, if you want to show a photo or a company logo or whatever, you have to label it. And to label it, there's the image element, the IMG. And you do this so that screen readers know what an image is and can tell that to their blind users. But you also do this for places where, for example, there's a spotty mobile connection and you don't actually know if the image will load. So if you want to know as a sighted person what might be in that place when the image hasn't loaded yet, it's useful to label that. And to label an image, you do use an alt text, an alternative text that's provided to the img element by the alt attribute. And you make the text short but precise so that you can quickly convey what it is, like a company logo or a photo of 3 people standing in front of the Mozilla Monument in San Francisco or whatever. But you don't use the words graphic or image because screen readers already know that the img tag says that this is a graphic. So the img does not only tell the browser that it should load a graphic resource, but when translating that into the language that the screen reader understands, we call it the accessibility application programming interface, we already know that img represents a graphic. So having a word like graphic or image in here would be redundant information. So avoid that and instead concentrate on what that image actually is. Well, sometimes there are situations where you have images that actually do not need to be conveyed to the user. They might be decorative in the sense that they make things a little more beautiful, but are otherwise non-essential. And for that, we have a technique. And the technique is to say img, the img tag, and use alt equals quote quote, which is an empty string. Must be alt equals quote quote, cannot be alt equals nothing, and you must never ever leave out the alt text at all. The alt attribute must always be present because screen readers will otherwise try to get what the image might mean from a title attribute or from the source, the resource URL that the image references. Because missing alt text, like no alt attribute present at all, is viewed as an author error and not as intentional. If you want to be very explicit, and you do want to be explicit, use alt equals quote quote for decorative images. And screen reader users will appreciate that because it'll reduce clutter for stuff that's not informational in a sense that it's actually essential to understand the contents of the web page. Okay. Well, as I said, some of this is very old, but some of it is rather new. So there's the figure and fig caption elements in HTML5, which denotes some more advanced imagery. These have to be labeled too. Use the figure and fig caption and make sure that everything is properly semantically marked up. And for our vector graphics friends, SVG is a very preferred way to convey responsive graphics nowadays. And it has a title tag. The SVG standard has a title tag for SVG images. And that's really a tag. It's not text. It's not an attribute. It's a title tag. And that's to be used to label images in SVG. So we do have more than just the img tag to include graphics. I forgot to mention background images here, CSS-generated background images, but they have several accessibility issues. Among them, you cannot label them properly, so you do want to maybe avoid those, but that's a different discussion altogether. Okay, that's it for images. Next topic, very important and thus a bit longer. Labeling form controls. Very, very important. A lot of the web is based on the user inputting something, sending something back to the server, and the server generating something useful out of it, be it shopping, be it information lookup, whatever. So in order to empower users to actually put the right thing into the form field, you have to label them. And HTML has had labeling for form fields for a very long time. And guess what? Many people still get it wrong in the year 2016. I'm still seeing lots of web pages when I browse daily that actually don't have proper labeling in form fields. So for once and for all of you who are watching this, you now know how it's done right. You see it on the slides here. Input, the input tag, the select tag, and the text area tag. Inputs of all types except buttons. Buttons are its own subject some moments later, but all the kinds of text fields, checkboxes, and radio buttons, they can be labeled, and there's a label tag, and you connect the two by providing the ID of the input to the for attribute of the label tag. I've put down some sample code here. It says label for equals fn. In the inner text is first name, and the input has an ID of fn and a name of fname. That's important because you reference the ID, not the name. And the input is a simple text field. Below that, we have something similar just for demonstration purposes for a select, which where you can use the country selection. You also reference the ID of a select inside the label's for attribute. And the same for text area. I didn't put an example here, but that's pretty self-explanatory. For buttons, you have some more options. If you use the input type submit and reset, the label gets provided by the browser automatically in localized format. You can also use the value attribute. You could use images with alt text. And for the next slide, for the button element, where you can use buttons even outside of forms. If you could just give it a type of button, then it doesn't need a connection to a form. The same thing, you can use inner text, which is preferred because that will make it visible to everybody. You can use the value attribute as well. You can use images with proper alt text. And you can use for styling, for better styling, for example, you can use span elements inside the inner HTML of a button to provide some more flexible styling than the button element itself provides. So if you want to make things look some little more beautiful, use a button element if it provokes an action. If it's something that actually goes to a different page, that's a wrong element. Michiel said something about that earlier in his presentation. Don't use buttons for links. So this is always for an action that's being performed. So if you want to make things beautiful, and please, please, never ever use divs or spans with an on-click handler instead, because that'll make things totally inaccessible. You lose all keyboard functionality, you lose all semantics, and the only thing that'll work is the mouse, which includes at least half your user base, maybe. You know, it's a lot of people who then could not use those clickable divs and spans. Instead of use a proper button element, and for the styling, use a span or two or whatever inside that inner text and make it look more beautiful. But please, 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 never, ever, 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 ever in your life again use clickable divs or spans. Okay. Now, there are situations where you want to group elements together. That's often the case for something like a shipping address versus a billing address, or in many cases, a set of radio buttons. A set of radio buttons always needs to be grouped together. And guess what? HTML has you covered. There's a field set element. A field set is a set of form fields, you guessed that. And for the label, there's the legend element, which needs to be a child of that field set. The sample code on this slide shows it. It says field set, opening tag, legend opening tag, the question that's being asked, closing legend, then the other form controls that go into that field set, and then the closing field set tag. For radio buttons, this is even more important because for radio buttons, the keyboard interaction is such that you switch between one of the radio buttons. You can only have one selected with the up and down arrow keys, and tab will actually move you forward beyond the set of radio buttons. So if you have something like a, how old are you? Like too old or too young or whatever, and you have a set of radio buttons here, you must group them in the field set and legend. So the legend provides the question, like how old are you? And then you have the different input of type radio that tell the answers, like too young, old enough, too old, whatever. And that means that it's not only logical for screen readers because they see the connection between the radio buttons and the actual question that's being asked when people tab into that group of radio buttons, but also for keyboard users who are not screen reader users, they can select the right radio button properly without having to worry about anything. So if you would not use field set and legend, the results might be quite unpredictable because the browser doesn't know how many of those radio buttons that you may have on a form go together and which are actually to be separated from one another. So use field set and legend to provide the correct labeling and the grouping of elements. So why do we do all that? Well, first, because it's semantically correct. And that should always be your goal as a web developer. Deliver good craftsmanship when it comes to providing HTML and CSS, like use the correct stuff for the correct things. Second, it increases the touch target and the click target for mobile versus mouse users or touch screen versus mouse users. So when you associate a label to an input, you can click on either the input or the label to make it focusable and to be able to input something. And that makes it a much bigger target. So people who have motor issues, for example, who have tremors in their hands, who cannot position the mouse precisely, or who cannot tap on a touch screen in a very millimeter close proximity to what they aim, it's much easier to actually tap on, for example, the text like first name or street address rather than having to tap on maybe just a tiny little input that then expands to actually show the cursor and show the keyboard. So, and screen reader users will be able to pick up the correct label automatically. So blind users also benefit from that. And Also, people with speech recognition software can just say focus the field first name, and the voice recognition will find the field that is associated with the label first name and will focus that. Otherwise, they would have to make the um, the speech recognition software move through the controls until it reaches the correct element. And for screen reader users, if a field is not labeled, screen readers would only say something like edit or text field without letting the user know what's actually being asked of them. So there are lots of advantages of doing the right thing with forms. Okay, yeah, this question might come up. It's a new attribute, the placeholder attribute in HTML5, which can provide some visual indication of what is expected in a certain form field. The problem with the placeholder attribute is it is not meant as a replacement for a proper label. The spec is very clear on that. And the browser implementation is not always consistent. Some may put the text back when entered text is completely deleted. Others may not. So when you focus a text field that has a placeholder, as soon as you start typing, that text goes away and the context is lost. So that and the text might come back or it might not, depending on the browser. And even I hear that even in between like a desktop and a mobile browser of the same brand, there might be differences. So this is really, really inconsistent. I'm not a big fan of the placeholder attribute. I think it can be good for additional information, but it does not, never, ever replace the label. And for people who have some visual impairment issues, the styling of the placeholder is also not very good for the terms of the contrast ratio and some other problems that arise. And as soon as you use a mobile device and stand in the sunlight, you might also be affected, even if you don't have a visual impairment otherwise. So there are lots of good reasons not to use it extensively or just use it as a supplementary help, but not count on your form working if the text of it goes away, okay? So please be careful with that placeholder attribute. Okay, some more tips here. Use the input types for email, URL, telephone number, and others because it'll bring up the correct keyboards on mobile devices, and somebody who's had to enter an email address without the proper email keyboard on a mobile device will probably very much relate to what I mean. It's a huge help if you use the correct email types and not just the default of text. If an older browser visits that page, they'll fall back to the default of text, so there's no harm in actually using the correct types here and help those who have modern browsers and modern devices to get a proper keyboard. Use the required attribute. Yes, use the required attribute, which is a part of HTML5. It'll help verification. For example, in an email field, somebody will immediately see and hear, screen readers will hear if the email address is actually entered correctly, like it'll do some syntax checking, if an @ sign is present, and if the domain is valid and whatever. Obviously, it doesn't help with is the email address actually correct or is there a mistype, but the format is actually correct. And you can do some error checking even before the form is submitted if, for example, some information is even missing because of that required attribute. But also make sure that you use an indicator in the label that certain fields are required. It could be either the word required or you can put a legend at the top of your form where it says fields denoted with a star are to be filled out always and others are optional. Or vice versa. Sometimes you have more default fields that are required than you do have optional fields. Then it makes sense to do it the other way around. But never, ever, 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 okay, only do not ever denote fields by only color. Like if a required field, you say all the red fields must be filled out. Somebody with a color blindness will be very thankful because they can see it. And I think it's something like 8% of all the world's male population have a color blindness issue. So a lot of people might not actually be able to fill out such a form because you said, or you coded it to only show red or the color red as an indicator. Okay, make sure your styling keeps keyboard visibility. That's pretty obvious. If you tab through your form and you don't see where your focus is, there's something wrong with your styling. Always make sure that this is working correctly. Document structure. Yeah, this is a general purpose thing. Use P for paragraphs. Use block quote for cited paragraphs. Use the Q element for inline citations and so forth. Give your documents the semantic elements that are available from HTML because they are there to be used and not to be ignored. And use landmarks like header, nav, main, aside, footer. ARIA has some more, but we are not covering ARIA here, so that's a different topic. Very important, headings. We have 6 elements that are devoted to showing headings. They are ordered from 1 to 6, 1 being the highest level, 6 being the lowest. And if you have articles that are divided into subsections or several blog posts and something like that, do use the headers correct, the heading levels correctly. Don't mix, don't jumble, and make sure that your heading structure is logical. And if you want to look at samples, look at Wikipedia articles. Wikipedia articles do have a very good heading structure, and they even use that heading structure to form the table of contents that you see at the top of many articles. So that's a very good use, and it helps people visually and screen reader users to actually get the logic of your documents, especially if they cover more complex topics. Tables. To paraphrase a quote from Finding Nemo, tables are for data, not for layout. If you know Finding Nemo, fish are friends, not food. Tables are traditionally used for data presentations, be it items in a shopping cart, be it other types of tabular data that can be represented in such a logical form. But in the first couple of years, tables were also the only means of layouting stuff. We've moved beyond that in HTML4, which was standardized sometimes in 2000 or 2001. But even nowadays, I still see some forms that have the labels in the left column and the form fields in the right column of a standard table. And no, please stop it. It's something that's not appropriate anymore. Tables are there for a very specific purpose. So don't use them for layout. They are not for layout. They are data tables. The TD is a table data tag, for example. Once you've decided that you actually do use tables for data, which is good, give a summary via the caption element inside the table. Probably the first thing you want to do in a table, because it's something you want as at the top, so that says what the table is about. And use the elements that are available within a table. TH for table headings, like row headings and column headings, and use the scope attribute and other attributes to actually specify what this heading actually does does stand for. Like, is it a column header or a row header, or for certain cells inside a current row or column? And you have some other elements available, like row group, like col group, and others that help you put even more logic into your tables. But if tables get too complex, split them up. If there are tables that are growing bigger and bigger, and you find that you can split up the data into smaller, more easily digestible chunks, please do that, because that'll help everybody understand your data better, and it's easier to navigate. Sometimes there's no way around huge tables, but often there is. And if that's the case, feel free to actually split up tables into multiple ones. That'll help everybody understand your stuff better. Okay, this is some more general things that I think are important. I often find CSS mixed into HTML documents, or JavaScript being mixed into HTML documents. This is more a general programming best practice. Separate your concepts. Separate HTML, which is the content in which is being used by screen readers and other assistive technologies to actually give the representation of the web page, like the order of things and the text and all that stuff. CSS, cascading style sheets, are for the visuals, like the padding and the margins and the colors and fonts and whatever else, except for some things like display none, visibility hidden, or before and after text. CSS does not have a bearing on the way assistive technologies digest your content. It does not. There are ways to actually see if Flexbox model, this new stuff in CSS4, I think it is, should influence that order of accessibility exposure, but that hasn't been decided yet. Sometimes you can create really fancy disconnects between the actual DOM order, document object model order, and the visual order of things on the screen with CSS Flexbox models. That's still up in the air. That's not been fully decided on. It would make things more complicated, in my opinion, but that's a political debate I'm not going to go into here. And the JavaScript, obviously, it does add dynamics, and dynamics are not inherently inaccessible. They are accessible if the JavaScript puts out semantically correct HTML and CSS and does proper focus handling, for example, for pop-ups. If you do the right thing for keyboard navigation and so forth, so that when you pop up a dialog, you put the focus there because that's where the user's attention is, and so forth. So JavaScript is not inherently inaccessible. On the contrary, I encourage people to use it sensibly, because we do live in a dynamic web application world and we want to participate. But make sure that you apply the same rules to JavaScript output HTML as you do for that which you hand code. And that goes for all the fancy JavaScript frameworks as well, beginning at jQuery and not ending at Angular or React or whatever they are called. One important thing which affects many more people than just people with visual impairments, color contrast. Have you ever stood in the sunlight with your glossy smartphone or tablet and you tried to read something and you couldn't because the bright sunlight shone on you and the glossy screen reflects that and everything becomes blurry? Well, welcome to the world of too low contrast on websites or in apps or whatever. There is a W3C standard called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which recommends a contrast ratio of main content text of a ratio of 4.5 to 1. And that should be followed. There's a tool by TPG that's called the Color Contrast Analyzer. I hope I got the British English right. Which can help you do that. You can, like if you're a mouse user, and most of web developers are, you can, use like an eyedropper and, look at what your contrast ratios for different parts of your web pages are. Really good tool. There are some others who do the same thing or who have other means of analyzing that, and I encourage you to use that. And if you're in doubt, if it's still not working, put your page on a smartphone or tablet and stand in the bright light. Can be under a bright lamp or in the sunlight, and see if you can still read it. And a lot of people will thank you for that. Believe me, a lot more people than you might imagine. And here's one more topic, and I'd like to extend a thank you to Henny Swan for this particular thing. Keep the zoom alive. Many people disable zoom on mobile web pages, probably because their layout explodes once they start zooming. Well, guess what? The problem isn't the zoom, the problem is your layout. So if you've come across this and you are in a situation where your layout freaks out because you zoomed out, you do the pinch to zoom gesture, go back and see that you fix your responsive layout, because zooming is a requirement that every layout should adhere to and be responsive to. And it's not only people with visual impairments who will appreciate that. People who are getting older, but even younger people with maybe just a little visual inacuity might want to zoom stuff, especially if you use tiny fonts. And it's very frustrating if the zoom is disabled. So please keep the zoom alive. Don't disable it. And here's how you do it. So this is what is causing the zoom to be disabled. I have an article on my blog which links to Henny's blog, which also has this code sample. I took this code sample directly from Henny's blog post. So I'm leaving this here on the screen for the sighted folks for a bit, so that you can actually look at what it says. So this is the way to not do it. And here it is how you fix it. You basically you do the meta content width, device width, initial scale 1, maximum scale 2, and user scalable equals 1, and the name is viewport, and meta name viewport content user scalable equals yes. Okay, that's very important. And now you might wonder, where's WAI-ARIA in this? Well, guess what? All of this can be done without WAI-ARIA. And it should be. The first rule of WAI-ARIA is don't use it if you don't absolutely have to. Use semantic elements instead. Use the host language elements instead, because they have the built-in accessibility by the browsers and the keyboard navigation and all the fancy stuff that make web pages work for much more than just mouse users. WAI-ARIA is an advanced technique, not needed for all the above. So, and just because you've heard of WAI-ARIA and sugarcoating it, all of your content with some random ARIA attributes that you think you might know what they're doing, but aren't actually knowledgeable about, might actually do more harm than good. So please only use it if you absolutely must, and if you know what you're doing, and you know how to test it, or to find somebody who can test what you are doing. It's advanced stuff, and it's not needed for most standard things, believe me. Okay, and I'm getting to the end now. In conclusion, HTML is more than divs and spans, plus on-click handlers. It's powerless in its structure and semantics, which is pretty obvious if you look at the web's history and how basic everything was when it started. And correct semantics give better usability, better search engine optimization, and are for everyone. So that's what I want to conclude with. It's really like, if you use correct HTML in web pages and not just divs and spans, you get so much for free. Basically, I would say correct semantics get you 90 to 95% there. Some might be in CSS, like the color contrast. Some might be in the meta things, like not disabling zoom if you done that. But most of the correct semantics for everybody lies in correct HTML and CSS usage. Okay, and here's how to contact me. I am Marco Zehe, marco.zehe@gmail.com. Zehe is the last name, Marco is the first name, marco.zehe@gmail.com. I am at Marco in English on Twitter. There's also an at Marco Zehe, which is my German Twitter nick. And if you follow me there, you'll probably be unhappy unless you speak German. And on GitHub, I am Marco Zehe, Marcozehe, all in lowercase, or I think it doesn't matter. So if you are working on something and you feel like you need advice, you know where to find me on GitHub now, and you can add me if you like. And that's it for me. That concludes the presentation. And now I'm going to turn off the screen sharing so you can actually see who's been talking to you the last while. Okay. Oops.
Hey, that's really great. Marco, it's really important to go back to some basics, I think, at times. There we go. So thank you very much. I don't see Graham on the call yet, but I'm sure he'll join us soon. I don't see any questions for Marco yet. Just going to check that. Let's see. We have one from Ian Devlin. Which pattern is better? A label element that contains the input field, or a label which is associated to an input field with the for and ID attributes?
I think nowadays they are more or less equal. I still prefer the explicit association with label 4 instead of including the input in the label, because I've seen some strange results in different browsers with that in the not so distant past. But I think for the most part, they should be identical. If in doubt, try both in a prototype and test if you get the same results, and then use whichever you prefer. I personally, because I've been very long in this, I prefer the explicit association via the for and ID.
Okay, great. And we've got one more question from Mikhail Bill. Why would you set max zoom to 200%?
That is a good question. Actually, this is something I mostly relied on the expertise of others for this. I just thought it important to include it because it's something that I encounter often when people complain that Zoom has been disabled on something. I don't know if the actual 200% is a maximum value that's possible in this meta element, or if this is a value Henny chose for her article. I've seen this same pattern in other articles too, so I thought this was something like a maximum allowed value or something that would then be used. But as I am totally blind, I actually cannot see or could not see what happened in a Zoom thing. But I've seen this repeatedly around the web, this pattern of 200%. So I just took it as it were and showed it as a technique. But I'm not sure. Maybe Henny can answer that on Twitter, or chime in some other way on that front.
Okay, I have to let her know. So thank you very much, Marco. Is there anything else you want to add before we end the stream?
I would just like to thank you all for listening in, for watching, and for TPG to invite me to this great event. And I'm looking forward to what's to come, and also to rewatch some of the earlier sessions, which I only saw via tweets, but not in full yet. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Marco. Okay, we're going to switch to our next feed, so please join us in a few minutes for David, who's going to talk about supporting the development of, let me see, supporting the development of accessible websites. Thank you very much.